All right, so we're diving into IELTS speaking today. You shared this awesome full-length practice interview from Bark TV, and I'm really excited to break it down with you.
It's a great source for our deep dive.
Yeah, it is. We're going to be looking at the candidate strategies and see what kind of tips and tricks we can pick up along the way. Most people listening are probably pretty familiar with the IELTS speaking test, but for those who might need a little refresher, it's divided into 3 parts. We've got some introductory questions, then a short talk on a given topic, and lastly, a more in-depth discussion. What really stood out to me about this particular candidate was how they tackled those initial getting to know your questions. They said they preferred to study alone for focus, but then also acknowledged the benefits of group study for peer learning. It just seemed like a really smart way to approach that.
Yeah, it was a very strategic approach, I think. By mentioning both individual and group study, the candidate kind of subtly shows a well-rounded approach to learning. It hints that they're adaptable and open to different learning styles, which are definitely things that examiners look for.
Right. So it's not just about answering the question directly, but also about giving those subtle clues about your personality. And you know what else impressed me? The way they just naturally used vocabulary related to education and learning, words like concentration, methods, effective, peers, it all just flowed so smoothly.
That natural use of vocabulary is key. It's one of the things that examiners pay close attention to. They're not just listening for grammatically correct sentences. They're also looking at your range and accuracy of vocabulary.
It's true. It's almost like they're casually showing off their vocabulary skills without even trying. It makes you think like, what other words could I slip into my responses? No matter what the topic is.
Absolutely. It's a good thing to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Now, moving on to part 2 of the test. The candidate had to describe a time they solved a problem under pressure. And they chose to talk about a university group project where one of the members dropped out.
Ugh, a classic group project nightmare. We've all been there.
It does seem to be a universal experience. But what's interesting here is how the candidate framed it. Instead of focusing on the negative, they focused on the steps they took to overcome that obstacle. Meeting with the team, redistributing the work based on strengths, and even asking for an extension, it showed a lot of initiative.
Totally. It shows they didn't just freeze up. They assessed the situation and took charge. That kind of initiative and adaptability are super valuable.
And it fits perfectly with the whole problem-solving aspect of the IELTS speaking criteria.
Yeah.
It's not just about what they did, but how they presented it, in a way that highlights those skills.
So it's almost like they're strategically telling their story to hit those key assessment points, but without sounding like a robot.
Exactly. And that brings up an interesting thought for our listeners. How would you tackle this kind of prompt? Think of a time you successfully solved a problem. How would you tell that story to showcase your own problem-solving skills?
That's a great challenge. Now let's move on to part 3, where things get a little broader. One question that stood out to me was, what are some common problems people face in their daily lives? The candidate just rattled off a ton of different issues, from financial struggles to relationships to health and even time management. I was pretty impressed with how much they covered.
It's not just about listing problems, though. It's also about what comes after.
Yeah.
And this candidate actually offered potential solutions for each problem they mentioned. That shows a deeper level of thinking and understanding. It's what we call critical thinking, and it's a big deal in the IELTS speaking test.
So it's like going beyond just identifying the problem and actually trying to figure out how to solve it. It shows you're really thinking things through.
Exactly. Now, there was one exchange that I thought was particularly interesting, and that was when the examiner asked about relying too heavily on technology.
Oh, yeah. I remember thinking, ooh, this is going to be good. And the candidate really delivered. They didn't shy away from the complexities of that question.
They really didn't. They acknowledged the good things about technology,
Huh.
like easier communication and access to information. But then they also talked about the potential downside to being too reliant on it, especially when it comes to dealing with emotions. That's a balanced perspective, and that's what makes their answers stand out.
Yeah, it shows they've thought about it from different angles and aren't just giving a one-sided answer. It really makes you think, where else do those critical thinking skills come into play? It's like a reminder to always look beneath the surface.
That's a fantastic point.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of looking beneath the surface, let's talk a little bit more about something else the candidate said. They wrapped it up by mentioning some really essential skills like creative thinking and adaptability and, of course, time management. It's like they gave us a cheat sheet for success, not just for the IELTS, but for life in general.
It's so true. They're basically saying, look, I don't just talk about these things, I actually use them. Which reminds me, earlier you talked about how the candidate kind of positioned themselves as a well-rounded learner by mentioning both individual and group study. Were there any other times where they did something similar, like where they subtly highlighted a particular strength or quality through their words?
Oh, there were definitely a few more instances that come to mind. Remember when they were describing that group project and they used the phrase redistributed work based on strengths?
Yeah.
It seems like such a simple phrase, but it does so much work. It suggests that they're not just a team player, but they can also take the lead and, recognize and utilize the strengths of others. That's a really powerful message, especially for someone aiming for a higher band score.
Wow, I didn't even pick up on that. It's amazing how much meaning can be packed into just a few words. It's like they're playing this subtle game of language.
It is. And it's a game you can learn to play too. As you're preparing for the IELTS speaking test, really pay attention to the words you choose. Think about the message you want to send and then choose words that subtly reinforce that message.
That's a great tip. It's like we're cracking the code to a higher band score. Okay, so I have to admit something. When the examiner asked about relying too heavily on technology, my first thought was, here comes the predictable technology is bad rant. But I was so pleasantly surprised by the candidate's answer. They didn't fall into that trap at all.
I know, right? It would have been so easy to just list all the negative things about technology. But this candidate actually went beyond that and talked about both the pros and the cons. It shows a much deeper level of thinking.
It makes you wonder if maybe the examiners are getting tired of hearing the same old answers over and over again. They're probably looking for something a little more insightful and original.
I think that's a safe bet. Remember, they're listening to tons of candidates every single day. So an answer that shows real critical thinking is definitely going to stand out.
So for anyone listening who's prepping for the IELTS, here's a little challenge. Don't just settle for those easy, predictable answers. Really push yourself to think critically. Consider different perspectives.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to express your own unique opinions.
Exactly. It's not about having the right answer. It's about showing your ability to think for yourself, to communicate effectively, and to engage with complex issues.
Okay, before we wrap things up, I want to go back to something the candidate said that really struck me. They talked about how obstacles can be opportunities to show resourcefulness. It's such a great way to look at challenges.
It really is. It reminds us that even when things are tough, we still have the power to choose how we react. And those tough situations can actually pull out the best in us. They force us to be creative and come up with new solutions.
It's like those motivational posters that say, challenges are just opportunities in disguise. But it's not just a cheesy quote. It's a real mindset shift.
It is. And it's a mindset that can help you so much, not just in the IELTS, but in every part of life.
So next time you're facing a problem, big or small, try to channel your inner IELTS candidate. Break it down, come up with a plan, and remember, you got this.
Don't forget to focus on the positive. What did you learn from the experience? How did it help you grow? What skills did you develop?
These are the things that will impress the examiner and make you a stronger, more resilient person. Who knows, you might even surprise yourself with how well you handle things. Now, as we wrap up our deep dive into this practice interview, I want to leave our listeners with one final question. The candidate mentioned that technology has its limits, especially when it comes to emotions. What are some other areas where human skills and judgment will always be important, even in a world that's becoming more and more tech-driven?
That's a really interesting question to think about. Technology is advancing so quickly, but there's still some things that machines just can't do.
Things like empathy and creativity and intuition, all those things that make us human.
Exactly. And those things are more important now than ever as we navigate this constantly changing world. Technology can be an amazing tool, but it's up to us to use it in a way that benefits everyone.
And to never forget the value of human connection and understanding, especially in areas where things like empathy and critical thinking and ethical decision-making are crucial.
I completely agree. Technology can help us, but it shouldn't replace our humanity. It's something we all need to remember.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even with all this incredible technology, there are still those essential human qualities that we can't lose sight of.
It is a good reminder. And it's something to keep in mind, not just when you're preparing for the IELTS, but for any challenge you face. Don't underestimate the power of clear communication and structured thinking, and that positive solution-oriented approach. Those things will take you far.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes this deep dive so insightful. It's not just about doing well on a test. It's about equipping yourself with the tools to succeed in all areas of life.
Exactly. The IELTS speaking test It's like a mini version of real-world communication.
Yeah.
And the ability to really articulate your thoughts clearly and back up your ideas with solid examples and just, engage in a meaningful conversation. Those are skills that go way beyond any exam.
That's so true. And hey, listener, remember, you've got this channel that Inner IELTS Candidate break down those challenges and approach them with confidence. You'll be amazed at what you can achieve when you combine those skills with a positive mindset.
And don't ever stop learning and exploring and pushing yourself to grow.
Yeah.
That's the real key to success in the IELTS and in life.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the IELTS speaking test. We hope you found it helpful and inspiring. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep striving for excellence.
Happy learning.